In the falling Gothic city of Yharnam, Ludwig, the Holy Blade, sought to save its citizens from the horrors they face each day. A legend to some, a degenerate to others, Ludwig's story is one of the most beautiful, tragic, and detailed narratives in Bloodborne. In today's video, I'll explore the journey of the first true hunter of the Healing Church, its leader and champion, who's ultimately met his end after encountering the Great Ones. Along the way, I will connect his story with historical and literary parallels that deepen the lore. Ludwig was a well-known figure in Yharnam, likely the leader of the Healing Church hunters, and thus a man of significant influence. We can infer that he came after Lawrence and Gehrman, during a time when the beasts roamed Yharnam more freely. Gehrman only mentions Ludwig once, and in quite neutral terms, when explaining the church to the player.
The Healing Church and the blood ministers who belong to it were once guardians of the hunters in the times of the hunter Ludwig. They worked and forged weapons in their unique workshop. Today, most ministers don't recall the hunters.
In truth, we know little about the church hunters, only that many of them went mad from what they witnessed. But one name endures: Ludwig. As the leader of the church hunters, Ludwig accomplished many things. His workshop developed powerful weapons like Ludwig's Holy Blade and Ludwig's Rifle, which were quite different from the simpler, but highly efficient, tools of the old workshop, such as the axe or the saw cleaver. The game itself makes it clear that the Healing Church crafted heavier, silver weapons, anticipating that the beast would become even more powerful. And silver is no random choice. It has long been known for its unique physical properties and symbolic weight in literature. In the 19th century, especially after the Industrial Revolution, silver became widely used in chemical experiments because of its exceptional qualities. It's highly reflective, with a brilliant natural luster, it conducts electricity and heat extremely well, it's a highly malleable and possesses antimicrobial properties, acting as a natural germicide. Moreover, silver is less reactive than the other metals, meaning it doesn't oxide easily. Of course, as a noble metal, silver has also of high commercial value, prized by the upper classes of that era. In literature, silver carries a rich symbolism, associated with purity because it doesn't tarnish, with protection against supernatural forces such as vampires and werewolves, and with sacred weaponry, particularly in Gothic fiction. Bloodborne, steeped in Victorian and 19th century influences, naturally gives silver a place of high importance. By choosing silver, Ludwig not only signals its effectiveness against Yharnam's beasts, but also transforms it into a symbol of incorruptibility, honor, and purity. The very virtues he expected from his hunters, who were almost like medieval knights. Quickly observation. The authors of the 19th century literary Romanticism were influenced by the literature and history of the Middle Ages. Even the radiant sword hunter badge worn by Ludwig and his hunters is crafted from radiant silver. Ludwig's holy moonlight sword, in its pre-transformation state, also appears to be made of shining silver. But beyond precious metals, Ludwig was also responsible for training an elite group of hunters known as the Holy Blades, men who follow an ancient code of honor. The hunt might be bloody and brutal, and the prey might be former humans turned into beasts, but Ludwig expected his warriors to remain honorable to the very end. According to the Radiant Sword Hunter badge, the Radiant Sword indicates the heirs to the will of Ludwig. These hunters, also known as Holy Blades, are what remains of an ancient line of heroes that date back to a very early age of honor and chivalry. Beyond the Holy Blades, Ludwig engaged directly with the citizens of Yharnam, training ordinary civilians to combat the scourge. That's unusual. If the hunt could no longer be ignored, it was necessary to mobilize the people, to give hope to those men and women living in fear of the grotesque transformations brought by the corrupted blood. After all, the blood is the nectar of blasphemy. The description of the Yharnam hunter set, one of the first outfits the player can acquire, makes it clear that despite offering excellent and straightforward defense, it was not nearly enough to allow an ordinary man to stand any real chance against the beasts. Still, hope lingered in the hearts of the city's desperate souls. Ludwig's decision to recruit civilians can even be seen as revolutionary, especially in a city that seems to maintain strict social control. The ethos of Ludwig's hunters evoke the romanticized age of gallantry. In the eyes of desperate townsfolk, Ludwig was a nation hero, a knight-errant, the chief hunter roaming the night to slay monsters and protect the innocent. Clad in elegant church hunter garb and wielding a legendary weapon, Ludwig appears to be pulled straight from the pages of a chivalric romance. You can almost imagine the whispers around the fires of central Yharnam. There he goes, Ludwig, the gallant hero, the savior of our city. It is important to note that Ludwig's public image in Yharnam was carefully cultivated by the Healing Church, which needed to inspire hope and prevent chaos. A figure like Ludwig could mask the city's darker truths. As long as the people remain blinded by faith in the Holy Blades, there would be no room for despair. After all, only honorable men like them could fight back against such depravity. Probably, the church's ministers adopted the holy image of these knights and made Ludwig the face of their new crusade. He was held up as a chivalric ideal, a beacon of morality, justice, and heroism in a time of terror. The chivalrous branding was no accident. It inspired even the sceptical Yharnamites to fight under Ludwig's banner, much like common folk might flock to a righteous lord or a holy knight. Ludwig himself fully believed in this noble mission. After he is defeated, we can actually speak to what remains of Ludwig, in a rare moment in a From Software game where the player can converse with a boss after the battle. If our hunter is wearing any church attire, Ludwig asks,
"Tell me, good hunter of the church, have you seen the light? Are my church hunters the honorable Spartans? I hoped they would be."
This directly quote from Ludwig reveals just how deeply he cared about the honor and discipline of his order. He invokes the Spartan warriors, famed for their courage and unity, to describe his hunters, showing that he aspired to do that same legendary stature. At this point, the player can lie and say yes, that the church hunters still fight honorably. Ludwig then dies in relative peace, saying,
"Ah, good. That is a relief. To know I did not suffer such denigration for nothing. Thank you kindly. Now I may sleep in peace."
But if we tell the truth, Ludwig admits that deep down he believed his detractors were right, that it was all a lie. Then a beast-possessed degenerate was I, as my detractors made eminently clear. Does the nightmare never end? Indeed, Ludwig's holy blades mirrored aspects of real-world knightly orders. They combine martial prowess with a spiritual mission. In medieval history, groups like the Knight Templars began a devout warrior sworn to protect the innocent and uphold the faith. Similarly, Ludwig's hunters took an oath, implicitly in their badge and cause, to protect Yharnam from the inhuman scourge. Thinking further about literature, the parallel is clear. Ludwig's narrative evokes the tales of Arthur's knight or Charlemagne's paladins. men who lived and died by a code of honor. Chivalric romances were a popular form of prose and verse in the Middle Ages, sung in noble courts for centuries. They are fantastic stories that narrate the adventures of heroes, honorable knights who must undertake a series of quests before completing their main mission. Along the way, the hero suffers various trials, constantly testing their faith and honor. The most well-known are the Matter of France, which narrates the stories of Charlemagne and Roland, his chief paladin, and the Matter of Britain, which recounts the lives and deeds of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. If we believe that Ludwig was a nobleman before being completely corrupted by the blood and turning into a degenerate beast, it's easy to compare him with the heroes of chivalric romances. In the Song of Roland, we read how Roland refuses to abandon the field even as defeat loomed, sounding his horn and shattering his sword Durendal against a rock rather than letting it fall into enemy hands. In parallel, we can imagine Ludwig in Yharnam's bleakest hours refuses to abandon the hunt, determined that honor and sacrifice should triumph over despair. Indeed, the comparison with chivalric romances goes beyond his honorable man. The presence of a special, triumph weapon, almost mythical, capable of elevating its wielder, is present both in the stories of King Arthur and in the tales of Roland, and is also present in the sword wielded by Ludwig, the Holy Moonlight Sword. The famous Excalibur was received by Arthur from the Lady of the Lake, a gift from a mystical realm. Likewise, Ludwig's blade, the Holy Moonlight Sword, was an emblem of holy justice against the beasts, a banner of redemption for Yharnam. The true Moonlight Sword remained almost mystical. Few have ever set eyes on the great blade. The secrecy adds to its mystique, and we can understand that its bluish, radiant form, touched by the arcane, was likely used very sparingly. For the majority of Yharnam citizens, Ludwig's sword was just a beautiful silver blade. Durendal, Roland's sword, was a gift from angels to Charlemagne, who later entrusted it to Roland. Durendal's hilt contained relics of saints. The Holy Moonlight Sword may not contain literal saintly relics, but in Bloodborne's context, it's arcane, perhaps housing a cosmic power. Finally, when Ludwig fell, the sword stayed with him, waiting for the next worthy hand. In the middle of the battle, Ludwig is illuminated by his faithful companion. As if the sword knew that the player was someone worthy of carrying it, but before it could be taken, it offered its master a final chance of redemption, to fight as a man, a holy blade, and not as a beast. Yet, despite all this supposed heroism, Ludwig's legend was not universally accepted. Within the Healing Church, not everyone saw him as a flawless hero. Some detractors whispered that Ludwig was little more than a beast-possessed degenerate, criticized his methods and his hunters. Were they right? Did the honorable man give way to the bloodthirsty beast in such a brutal way? Did Ludwig believe himself to be good, even as he had already fallen into the spiral of madness the game showed us? Ludwig may have arisen as a knight in a city of Gothic nightmares, but as anyone who reads chivalric romances knows, the ideals of honor are soon tested by the realities of war and temptation. Ludwig was about to face his own temptation, not dragons or the devil, but the corrupting blood that coursed through Yharnam's veins. Despite all his chivalry, Ludwig was hiding something, his addiction to the old blood. The demonstration of blood in Yharnam could heal and empower, but it slowly led its users to a cruel transformation. Ludwig, as the chief hunter, partook deeply on this holy blood in order to fight the beasts. Likely, their reliance became a damning addiction. The tragedy of Ludwig embodies a classic trope, the devout knight whose idealism is twisted into the very evil he once opposed. We see echoes of this trope throughout history. The Knights Templar, for example, began as humble warriors, monks sworn to protect pilgrims, but ultimately were accused of heresy, idolatry, and corruption when power and wealth ensnared them. By 1314, they had fallen into disgrace, their leaders burned at the stake under charges of heresy, blasphemy, idolatry, and financial corruption. So too did Ludwig's Holy Crusade falter under the wave of bloodshed. The Healing Church, a bastion of healing and faith, gradually succumbed to hubris, conducting grotesque bloody experiments that led to inhuman transformations. Ludwig, for all his virtue, was not immune. His idealism became a form of blind faith in blood. At first, he may have understood the consequences of indiscriminate blood use, but perhaps he believed himself superior, immune, more in control than the vast majority. Yet, that's not what happened. Over time, Ludwig, the hero, became the very thing he fought against, a beast-possessed degenerate. But how did this descent into madness begin? One of the items that the player unlocks with the Radiant Sword Hunter badge, an item associated with the Holy Blades, is the full attire of the Tomb Prospectors. And why is this relevant? According to the item description, the Tomb Prospectors were the ones who explored the old labyrinth on behalf of the Healing Church. The labyrinths of the Ptolemaios, the ruins of an ancient civilization that precede Yharnam and maintain a relationship with the Great Ones. Everything suggests that Ludwig, as an active member of the church, descended into these tombs in search of artifacts that could be used by Byrgenwerth. After all, these ruins hide the very secrets of the old Great Ones, sought after by those with the insight to imagined greatness. I like to imagine Ludwig, heroic and loyal to the interests of the Healing Church, leading teens into the Ptolemaian ruins, not only to discover more about the Great Ones, but to prove that it could be done, as a hero's quest. And indeed, he survived the descent. There he found items that would become essential to the story. He discovered the Guidance Rune and the Holy Moonlight Sword. The Guidance Rune increased power in battle, something essential for Ludwig, but the item's description also offers deeper insights. When Ludwig closed his eyes, he saw darkness, or perhaps nothingness, and that is where he discovered the tiny beings of light. Ludwig was certain that these playful dancing sprites offered guidance. They could empty Ludwig of his fears, at least in the midst of a hunt. The darkness, or nothingness, that Ludwig saw was the abyssal cosmos that gazed back at him, filled with the mysteries and wisdom of the Great Ones. In that moment, perhaps, Ludwig began his descent into insanity. Touched by the Great Ones, he received guidance, but also something inside him changed forever. The Holy Moonlight Sword was the other artifact found in the Ptolemaian ruins, of unknown origin, likely related to, or even created by, the Great Ones. The sword becomes synonymous with Ludwig himself. Its description indicates that few have ever seen the Great Blade, suggesting that few ever witnessed the full splendor of the sword touched by the arcane. Perhaps because the sword, being a sentient artifact, chooses those who will receive its guidance. It's no coincidence that Ludwig, even after transforming into a beast, is able to regain his consciousness and remember who he was, after the sword, in the middle of battle, calls to him once more. Of course, we know that the Holy Moonlight Sword is a recurring Easter egg in From Software games. But here, the developers were not just making a playful reference. The sword holds a deep significance within Ludwig's story. If the sword is a sentient relic, then it called Ludwig, much as Excalibur called the young Arthur. To a religious, heroic mind like Ludwig's, this was a divine revelation. He believed that a great cosmic force had given him a holy mandate to hunt the beast relentlessly. Still, from Ludwig's perspective, the holy moonlight sword was an unequivocal beacon of hope. It was, as he says, his true mentor, guiding Ludwig in a way that only he could comprehend. After all, whatever guidance it has to offer, it seems to be of a very private, elusive sort. Curiously, Simon the Herald tells the player, before giving them the Holy Moonlight Sword, "Here, this is Ludwig's guiding light, the blinding thread that led and misled the consummate hero, the poor brute." If the sword was capable of manipulating Ludwig, as well as guiding him, we may never know, but this line certainly suggests something of that nature. One observation: the fact that the sword bears the name Moon connects to how the moon has been treated across so many cultures and stories. The moon is linked to the divine and pure, but also to madness and change. The term lunatic literally comes from luna, the Latin word for moon, because people once believed the full moon could drive one insane. Shakespeare alludes to this in Othello. "It is the very arrow of the moon. She comes more nearer earth than she was wont, and makes men mad." Bloodborne's lore fully embraced this. The full moon or blood moon triggers the beastly transformation, the moon responsible to make men mad. At the same time, the pale moonlight from Ludwig's sword seems to have a calming, guiding effect on him, implying a sort of pure lunar influence, stark contrast to the corruptive blood moon. By the time the events of Bloodborne take place, Ludwig has long since succumbed to the bloodlust. The healing church's once bright holy blade had become a blood-drunk hunter. Night after night, beasts were slain, blood was spilled. Hunters grew intoxicated by violence, eventually unable to distinguish justice from carnage, and Ludwig was no different from these hunters. Religious fervor and bloodlust increasingly overtook Ludwig's order. The man who once spoke of honor and light now led slaughters. Slowly, he became the degenerate that his enemies had always claimed he was. The player encounters Ludwig the Accursed in the Hunter's Nightmare, not wandering through Yharnam. But why does this occur? We know that the Hunter's Nightmare is a kind of purgatory for the hunters drunk with blood. We can deduce that the hunters we find there have already died and are now trapped, consumed by guilt and madness after so long relying on the cursed blood. It can be seen as a purgatory, a fitting punishment for those hunters to repeat the nightmare eternally, never finding peace. As the hunter Simon states,
"Do you know why the hunters are drawn to this nightmare? Because it sprouted from their very misdeeds, things that some would rather keep secret."
If we think of this realm as a passage for dead and tormented hunters, then how did Ludwig die? Or better yet, did he truly die? I like to think that, consumed by guilt and madness, Ludwig may have brought about his own demise, thereby ending up in the hunter's nightmare, where he lost his consciousness, his willpower, and even his memory. It was there that he became the horrific beast we know, a grotesque fusion of horse and human. Or perhaps someone very powerful killed him, exploited some vulnerability in the Holy Blade. We will never know for certain. Either way, the monstrous form Ludwig takes within the nightmare is memorable. As the game notes, Ludwig was the first of many healing church hunters to come, many of whom were clerics. As it was, clerics transform into the most hideous beasts. And indeed, he becomes an amalgamation of beast and man, a hybrid of horse and human with eyes inside one of his maws. I already discussed the symbolism of eyes in Elden Ring and Bloodborne in my video about the basilisks. Ludwig the Accursed exudes a distinct Gothic horror not only in his physicality but also in his story. First, his design. It is deeply symbolic. The proud knight and the hidden monster are literally conjoined in Ludwig's cursed form. The horse, often associated with knights and nobility, here becomes the most human aspect of the creature, but it is in anguish. Meanwhile, the beastly maw exposed the ugly truth that had lurked inside Ludwig all along, an all-consuming bloodlust and ambition that could never be sated. The place where we encounter Ludwig is both macabre and tragic. He is found in the underground corpse pile, where he slaughtered creatures and hunters without thought, creating a river of blood that runs through this part of the nightmare. One of the decaying corpses agonizes when the player enters the boss arena. Ludwig's story also closely aligns with the tradition of Gothic horror. Like the protagonists of Frankenstein, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or the picture of Dorian Gray, Ludwig is a tragic figure split between light and shadow, virtue and vice, civilization and barbarity. We face here the classic duality of Gothic characters, the struggle between the lofty human and the loathsome beast within a single being. Notably, in the second phase of the fight, we no longer face Ludwig the Accursed, but Ludwig the Holy Blade. It is as if the presence of his holy sword awakens the old Ludwig, the Knight Commander, for a brief moment. As if for an instant, light managed to overcome the monster. Curiously, as many players have noticed, if we finish Ludwig with a visceral attack, Ludwig dies in a more human way, laying his sword by his side. If we kill him more aggressively, he screams in an animalistic manner. It is interesting to see how Ludwig has so many subtle details. It is as if the developers truly wanted to show more of this character than of so many others. Indeed, Ludwig is the only human enemy in Bloodborne who regains his humanity after transforming into a beast. In the end, Ludwig thanks the player, finally finding peace, dying as a human and not a beast.
Thank you kindly. Now I may sleep in peace.
In Gothic literature, the monsters are often sympathetic. Think of Frankenstein's creature, struggling to understand who he is, monster or human. Or Dr. Jekyll's torment at the actions of Mr. Hyde. Something similar happens with Ludwig. Once he was Yharnam's shining knight, at the end he is a decapitated beast begging for absolution. As Simon says,
a tragic figure, but he will shame himself no longer. He died with his ideals untarnished. He was a true hero, and earned that much at least.
Ludwig's story is a tragedy worthy of chivalric epics and Gothic novels that inspire Bloodborne. Like so many tragic heroes in literature, his greatest virtues, honor, courage, devotion, become the very seeds of his downfall. In the end, Ludwig was a man trapped between two worlds, the noble knight of Yharnam's past and the grotesque beast forged by blood, madness and hubris. His body may have decayed into a monstrous form, but his spirit endured, clutching desperately to that final glimpse of moonlight, a faint reminder of who he once was. That is the brilliance of Bloodborne and its developers. It is no accident that Ludwig has one of the only boss themes sung in Latin, unique animations, and memorable lines of dialogue. He is not just a simple boss. And perhaps, That's why his final words resonate so deeply.
Even in this darkest of nights, I see the moonlight.
If you enjoyed this kind of content, where we explore the intersection of video games lore, history and literature, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. Until next time, bye!